They tell an anecdote about a rabbi who loved preaching about the need to respect, honor, love, cherish, and nurture children. Almost every Shabbos, when this rabbi stood behind his pulpit, he waxed eloquently about the need and the privilege to be kind and sensitive to all types of children. One day, his alleyway, his driveway was being paved with fresh concrete, and as is the custom of good Jewish children, they always crave to make an imprint on the world and to make sure they leave a very vibrant legacy. And so as they see this fresh pavement, they dance, they jump, and each one engraves his or her own unique message to civilization. As the rabbi comes out on the porch, he's horrified by all of these new characters, words, messages in his new pavement. Losing his temper, he begins to holler, "You brats, you troublemakers, you horrible, destructive chutzpanyaks." He begins screaming at these kids. The Rebbetzin comes out and she says, "Rabbi, every Shabbos you speak so eloquently about the need to be sensitive to all types of children. The need to love children. Why are you hollering? Why are you screaming? Why'd you lose? You're cool." He looks at his wife and he says, "Rebbetzin, I love children in the abstract, not in the concrete." It's easy to love and wax eloquent about children, about respecting differences in the abstract. A much more formidable challenge is when discussing it in the concrete. This Shabbos, walking home from shul, early afternoon, I shared with my children, my two oldest sons. I said, I'm going to tell you something I heard myself from the Rebbe at the last Fabrengen ever, till Mashiach comes, which was Shabbos Parshas Vayakel, Tovshin Nun Beis. It was also Shabbos Shkolim that year. Vayakel was separate from Pekudei, and this was the last Fabrengen that the Rebbe held. And it was moving for me to be able to walk home from shul and give them a regard, share with them those words I myself had the privilege to hear from the Rebbe and give it over to my children. They listened, they absorbed, they were thankful for it. And I could feel in the making the vibrant energy of the chain of Jewish history, of the Messiah, of tradition, from father to son, from mother to daughter, from parents to children, from Rebbes to students, etc. The Rebbe in that Fabrengen, in the first sicha, asked the following question. He said, in Yiddishkeit, we always suggest, if you could please put your cell phones on vibrate. In Yiddishkeit, we always motivate and encourage wholesomeness, perfection. Zekeli v'anveus, Chazal say in Masechta Shabbos, hisnal fun of b'mitzvahs, beautify a mitzvah, a beautiful lulav, a beautiful sefer Torah, a beautiful mezuzah, a beautiful tefillin, a beautiful Shabbos table. When it comes to karbonis, the halacha is an offering has to be wholesome, unblemished. If the animal is a balmum, if it's blemished, it's disqualified from being a carbon. The Rambam famously says in Hilchis Esurei Mizbeach, everything you donate to the Rebbeinu to Hashem should be min hasholem or min hamufchar, should be from the choicest, from the best. And there's only one exception, and the exception is when it comes to the contribution in the opening of Parshas Kisisa, Parshas Shkolim. There the commandment is one must give machatzis hashekel. A half, not a whole shekel. And if somebody came and said, I want to give a whole shekel, it was not accepted. Even if you were wealthy, we would not accept more. We want only a half shekel. Asked the Rebbe a question, he quoted the question from commentators of earlier generations. Why this unique commandment to give a machatzis? Why not tell the Jews everybody could give 1 shekel? It's not so much more. It's just one. Somebody wants to give $1? No, you have to give 50%. You have to give 50 cents. Why? The Rebbe's answer then was unforgettable. He prefaced the answer with another question. And the second question was, when the Torah wants to identify how much is a machzis hashekel, the Torah continues by saying, Esrim gerah hashekel. A shekel is equivalent to what was known in ancient biblical currencies as 20 gerah, or also known as 20 ma'ah. Ma'ah was a certain silver currency, and 20 of those were equivalent to 1 shekel. The weight, the silver weight of the shekel was equivalent to 20 gerah. And you have to give half of that. Ask the Rebbe, if the Torah is trying to tell you how much to give, it could have said what? Eser gerah machzis hashekel. Why do you have to tell me that a shekel is 20 gerah? And you have to make the calculation and say, half of that must be 10 gerah. The Torah, without writing anything superfluous, can go straight to the point. Say, what's a machzis hashekel? Eser gerah, 10. The answer is because the Torah doesn't want us to give a machzis hashekel. The Torah wants us to give a shekel, a whole shekel. Everything should be whole. If you can give whole, don't give half. I want you to give a whole shekel. And that's why it tells us how much a shekel is. Esrim gerah hashekel. But it says to give machzis? No. When you realize that you are a half and another Jew is the other half, so when you and another Jew are giving together a half a shekel, it's really one person giving 1 shekel. To the contrary, if the Torah would tell me on my own to give a whole shekel, this would be blemished. You know why? Because I am self-contained. I am not connecting with my own true wholesome self, which is only when I connect up myself and I link it to the identity of another Jew. But when you and I together both give a machzis hashekel, and we are really not 2 separate entities, we are really one entity. So what happened? 1 Jew gave a shekel, a full shekel, which is esrim gerah. The challenge is that when we look superficially, we see ourselves as completely self-contained. But when you go a little deeper and you appreciate your internal makings, and you appreciate the soul, and you appreciate what is at the depth of your own identity and character, you realize that a relationship with another is not a relationship with somebody outside of you, somebody who's a stranger. Essentially, it's a relationship with your own expansive sense of consciousness. Essentially, it's a relationship with your own larger self, because the self is larger than the self. And when you reduce the self completely to the self, then it's not the self. You got that? I know you got that. Did you get that?
Together we got it.
Oh, very good. Somebody's listening. This was the Vort. Gewaldige Vort. What a beautiful Vort. The Rebbe spoke about this for close to an hour. The first sicha was close to an hour. He elaborated on it, he gave examples, he gave illustrations, he went on to different subjects, he connected it to Vayakel and many other themes. The theme of that first sicha, I can still see and hear the Rebbe saying these words. And in my mind, I think that this message captures so profoundly the theme of the event tonight commemorating the yahrzeit of Zlati Sharfstein Zechrono Livracha. And I want to thank her mother who phoned me a number of months ago and gave me the privilege, inviting me to this very important and very uplifting and very spiritual and soulful event in honor of her beloved daughter, who we just heard about a little bit of blessed memory, Tehei Nishmasa Tzrura B'tzur HaChayim, and an evening in her honor dedicated to the dignity of difference. Because it's often with these types of children, as she was, that we are reminded about how we are all a machzis. It's easy in life to start developing delusions of narcissism. A woman once said that she stopped dating because at her last date, the guy who took her out on the courtship, for 3 hours he spoke about himself. That's it. 3 hours. After 3 hours he turns to her and he says, you know, it's enough of me talking about myself. Let me hear, what do you have to say about me? It's easy in life to get caught up in our own orbit. It's easy in life to get caught up by feelings of insecurity, of jealousy, anger, revenge, hatred, politics, which cloud our better self. They cloud our higher self. They don't allow us to realize the impact we have on other people, the kinship we have with other people, the essential unity we have with other people. The fact that for me to win in life, I need you to win. And the fact that if you lose, ultimately I lose. It's not about a game of either I win or you win. You know, sometimes in couples, this is a great challenge. They once asked a couple how the relationship is. So he says, you know, when I got engaged, my wife thought I was brilliant. It's usually the case. So she allowed me to do all the talking and she did all of the listening. And then we got married, she changed her mind. So I began doing all of the listening and she began doing all of the talking. So they ask him, Anu, and how's it going now? He says, now 15 years later, we both do all of the talking and the neighbors do all of the listening. So you understand that it's easy in life to get caught up with everybody talking and the neighbors are doing all of the listening. And let's face it, our subjectivity can bribe us very heavily. How many conflicts between people, between families, between communities come from the fact that everybody sticks their claws into their own subjective experience of events and don't allow themselves to see their higher self and don't allow themselves to see the larger picture. And the consequences are often devastating and sometimes tragic. Now, the journey of every soul is very mysterious. Few of us understand, if any of us understand, the journey of a soul, the mystery of a soul. That's even with those children who we look at and we find them to be, so to speak, fully integrated within our social reality. And then you have souls and you gaze at them and it's very obvious that their journey is uniquely mysterious. The purpose of their creation, really like the purpose of every person's creation, is beyond us. And what they challenge us more than anything else is they challenge us to be humble, to become humble, to broaden our horizons, to see things in another way. I've once spoken and explained that at the sneh, at the burning bush, the Medrash Rabbah says that the burning bush represented the pain of the Jewish people throughout history. And Moshe Rabbeinu wants to approach the burning bush and understand Asurana ve'eres amara gadlazai. I want to understand the secret of pain. And Hashem tells Moshe, Shalna lecha me'araglecha ki amakim ashata imad alav adamas koideshu. Meaning, when you're standing in the presence of a person who's enduring pain, the first thing you should know is take your shoes off your feet, because you're treading upon sacred soil. When you're standing in the presence of a person who's been tested with a painful experience, don't become a philosopher. Don't become a theologian. Don't be an expert. Take your shoes off your feet and become humble and stretch out your shoulder for the other person to be able to cry on it. Offer love, offer unconditional affection. Don't become an expert on explaining why things happen, to who things happen, how they happen, and the purpose of them happening, because usually we are completely clueless. There are many people sitting here in this room who have been tested with one thing or another, and the first thing I say to myself, and to all of us who this applies to is, we must take our shoes off our feet because we're treading upon sacred soil. When we're standing in the presence of parents who are raising special children, when we're standing in the presence of special children, all of us must take off our shoes from our feet because we're treading upon sacred soil. The experience of a mother and father who raise a special child is different than any other mother or father. The way they look at life, the way they look at children, the way they look at family, the way they cherish development, the way they see a body, the way they see a soul, the way they judge what is normal and what is accomplished in life is completely different. They operate in a different plateau. But we can get stuck in a very superficial vision and not appreciate the machatzitz. The fact that really there's a larger picture and there's a larger journey and all of us are linked and intertwined, and instead of being judgmental and protecting our own egos, we can actually expand our horizons and create a situation that can embrace all. The Rebbe once on Sukkah told the following story, the Baal Shem, Sukkah Tavshin Chavzai in 1966. The Baal Shem Tov once came to the city of Brod. City of Brod, you heard of Brod in Poland, and he built himself a Sukkah. And the Sukkah was a terribly blemished sukkah in the sense that halachically it was questionable. Why? Because sukkah has a lot of heterim and halacha. For example, the walls don't have to reach the schach. There's a principle called good asik, and the walls don't have to come down all the way because there's a principle called good achis, and there could be airspace in the middle because there's a principle called lavud, and there can even be a pasuk schach between the wall and the schach if it's less than dalar amas because there's a principle called doifen akuma, which is the wall becomes theoretically crooked. And his sukkah was basically built up with every possible loophole, and loophole is pun intended, every possible hole and gap that a sukkah can have, to the point that the rabbis abroad checked out the sukkah and disqualified it. And a note fell down from the schach which read, Sukkah Rabbi Yisroel Baal Shem Tov Ksheira, signed by Malach Metat. The angel of Metatron signs that the sukkah of the Baal Shem Tov is kosher. So of course the obvious question is, halacha can't be created in heaven, halacha must be created on earth. So the Rebbe answered that Malach Metatron was not inventing the halacha. Metatron was challenging the rabbis and telling them, if you'll scrutinize and you'll study the facts better, you will see that it's a kosher sukkah. But then the Rebbe asked a more important question, namely, why build a problematic sukkah about which most rabbis believe it's puzzle, and then you need an angel to cast a note down from heaven and say it's kosher? Why the need for this supernatural intervention? Just build a nice, lovely sukkah like we build. Why such a sukkah? Why such a problematic sukkah? And this is what he answered. He said, what's a sukkah? What's a sukkah? A sukkah is Yeminoi Techapkeni. A sukkah is the Hashem's embrace of the Jewish people. Right? It says, Smoiloi tachas l'roishi v'yeminoi techapkeni. His left arm is under my head and his right arm embraces me. So the Arizal says, Smoiloi tachas l'roishi is Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Yeminoi techapkeni is sukkahs. That's why a sukkah is kosher if you have two walls and a little part of a third wall. Because when the right arm embraces you, the Arizal writes, and the Alter Rebbe explains it in Lekutei Torah in his Maimorim of Sukkahs, when a right arm embraces somebody, so the Arizal and the Alter Rebbe say, take a look at an arm. There's three sections in an arm, three walls. You have one section is from the shoulder till the elbow, one joint, and then from the elbow till the wrist, and then you have the actual hand. So now when you're embracing somebody with your right arm, take a look, what do you have? You're encircling their waist with the section from your shoulder till your elbow, and then their back with the section from your elbow till your wrist, and then you come around to their other waist with the fist. So the Arizal says, that's a sukkah. Hashem is embracing you with his right arm, so you have one wall, that's this wall, and then you have a second wall, that's this wall, and then you have a little bit, hashlishis afilu tefach, that's the third. So Hashem embraces the Jewish people in the Sukkah. The Baal Shem Tov, however, built a certain type of Sukkah. You know why? It's easy to embrace perfect people. It's easy to embrace impeccable children. It's easy to embrace flawless people. Come into my Sukkah. But the Baal Shem Tov wanted that every single Jew should be comfortable in his Sukkah. The Baal Shem Tov wanted that every type of neshama should feel that it has a place in the Baal Shem Tov Sukkah. And some neshamas are filled with gaps and filled with crevices. And some people walk around the world and they feel like a doifen akuma. They feel like they're a crooked wall or a lavud or a good asik. They're not high enough, they're not low enough, they're not here, they're not there. And they come into a sukkah, they have no place in this sukkah. The Baal Shem Tov wanted to make sure that in his sukkah, every soul will be restored to its pristine dignity. In his sukkah, every Jewish child will feel comfortable. They will feel that this is my home. In the Baal Shem Tov sukkah, there has to be an energy that accommodates every type of person, with every type of challenge, with every type of crevice, with every type of gap, with every type of void. That's who the Baal Shem Tov Sukkah has to include. These Jews who come in and they see there's holes everywhere, the whole Sukkah is broken. Say, I'm a chaya. This is a Sukkah where I feel comfortable. It's very easy for us. It's easy for parents. It's easy for educators. It's easy for rabbis. It's easy for mentors to embrace children, to embrace youth who have 4 nice big walls perfectly encircled. That's not so difficult. But the Baal Shem Tov wants that the Sukkah that you embrace should embrace every type of soul, and every type of person, and every type of neshama. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov made sure that his own Sukkah would never be the perfect Sukkah. It's a Sukkah that most rabbis looked at it and said, this is a Sukkah. This is Nishkin Sukkah. Because that's the Sukkah. It was a Sukkah, but that's a Sukkah where every soul could feel comfortable. You know, friends, I once saw a letter. I haven't seen it in quite a few years, so I'm saying it from memory. And really, I should look it up. And my friend Reb David Zaklikovsky, I'm sure, can send it to me as I speak. Because he's the master of all of the archives. So you might know, I saw this many years ago, was published. It was a letter from the late 1970s that the Rebbe wrote to some leading figure, maybe the president of Coney Island Hospital, who had influence on the department in the hospital that dealt with people and children who had various mental handicaps. This was in the 70s. A beautiful, beautiful letter where the Rebbe addresses the following issue. At that time, the stress, the pressure in official institutions sponsored by the government to separate church from state, church and state, was very intense, especially by good, open-minded, progressive Jewish activists. And thus, in that department, in the Coney Island Hospital, there was a time of the day that was designated for prayer. And the people in that department who had very special needs had the time to pray. But this can't be practiced anymore. So they abolished prayer from the schedule, the official schedule of the treatments that they had. The Rebbe addressed this to the president. And he wrote something, I'm not quoting verbatim, I'm quoting it based on how I understood it, but this was the message the Rebbe said. You know, we look around the world. We meet people all the time. When people reciprocate the gestures that we demonstrate, that we display to them, they reciprocate to us, we feel like we understand each other. I look you in the eyes, you look me in the eyes. I say good morning, you tell me good morning. How are you? You respond. We argue, we debate, we embrace, we like each other, whatever it is, but there's a level of communication and we feel on some level that we're understood. But there are those souls in the world that we have a very difficult time to communicate with. And the reason is we communicate through 5 senses. Through our eyes, through our ears, of course, through our mouth, our sense of touch, our sense of smell. We speak to each other, we listen to each other, we gaze at each other. There are those souls whose 5 senses are not fully developed. Their mental capacity to use those 5 senses the way we understand them is not fully developed. And therefore, we don't have a real way of communicating with them and knowing who they really are in the depth of their identity. They may not speak, they may not listen, or they may not demonstrate to us that they're listening. They may not give us the regular contact that we would expect. And therefore, we look at them and naturally we feel like we can't really communicate with them that much or get communication from them. And the Rebbe writes, can you imagine how lonely these souls are? Because it's not like they don't have a whole life inside. Of course they have a whole life inside. It's we who lack the tools to be able to experience that life. So it's really a matter of perspective based on the tools that you have. And I want to elaborate on this point for a moment. There's a famous metaphor that a physicist gave about modern quantum mechanics, but I think it's very applicable. There was a fisherman who decided he wants to determine the size of fish that exist on our planet, and he lowers a large net into one of the seas or oceans and leaves it there for a few weeks, and he lifts up the net, and he comes out with a declaration that in this ocean there are no fish smaller than 8 inches. Of course, became the laughing stock of every person. No fish smaller than 8 inches. In your own living room, you have a goldfish that is far smaller than 8 inches. What was the challenge? What was the problem? The problem was that the holes in the net were 8 inches wide. And therefore, there were no fish in his net that was smaller than 8 inches. They all slipped back into the water. They couldn't be apprehended by the net. What this means is the instruments you use to determine reality will define the nature of reality that you discover. And yet so few of us ever challenge the very instruments we are using to define what is reality. We all have our nets. Do you ever go back and say, what is your net made up of? Is it possible that the holes in your net are 8 inches and therefore you could never experience a reality of a fish that's smaller than 8 inches, and you will never even know that you're ignorant? That's what often happens in relationships with these types of special children. And by the way, it's not only children that we call special. It's every single type of child that doesn't fit in perfectly into our cookie cutter model. We look at these children with particular nets and we say, oh, as they used to say, this one is not completely integrated, or this one is not completely normal, or this one is not this. Based on what? Who decides what's normal? Who decides what's perfect? Who decides what's an accomplished child? Who decides this? We have nets. If you fit into that net, it's a reality. If you could communicate with me in the way that I communicate with you, so now suddenly we're on the same playing field, we could be integrated. But with these children, we lack the tools. We weren't given the tools. It's not our fault, but we don't have the net to be able to comprehend their neshama. Do you know how lonely they are? And the Rebbe continues, but they all know that there's one presence which does understand them. And who is that? Their Creator. The one who created them. The one who created their soul. The one who created their body. He understands them because they're from Him. He made them. He understands them fully. And that is why, if prayer is important for every person, how vital a gift prayer is for these children. To allow them to communicate in their own way with their own Creator, who knows them in a way that nobody else can ever know them, sometimes not even their own parent. So how can you deprive these children from this gift of prayer? Was his concluding question in this letter of the late 1970s. When I read it many years ago, it taught me such a profound lesson about perspective, about what we define as normal or abnormal, about what we define as special or not special, about what we define as people's journeys. We always have to be able to challenge our net and ask the question, am I perhaps completely looking at things from my own finite, limited, narrow, insecure perspective, lacking the ability to see another person from Hashem's perspective? What does the Alter Rebbe say? Afayid af men kuken v'yeshteit in machshava hagdume da adam kadman. When you look at a Jew, you have to look at him or her the way he or she was perceived by God when Hashem conceived of this person in his initial thought. When Hashem conceived Zlati Sharfstein before she was born into our planet and enriched it for her journey on earth, when Hashem conceived her soul, or when Hashem conceived any child's soul, what did Hashem see in that neshama? What did Hashem see in that person? And if I do not put on those glasses, if I do not expand my horizons and develop that vantage point, I'm not only abandoning the other person and depriving them from the nurture I can give them, I'm also reducing myself to a much smaller, narrower creature. I'm not allowing myself to see myself as a machzis, and therefore have the expansive vision to be able to see the other person as my other machzis, who is really one with me. So the Baal Shem Tov Sukkah needed to be a Sukkah where everybody feels comfortable. Everybody feels it's my place. Everybody feels that this is my space. And I would add, maybe, that's why Hashem told Moshe, Yasher koichecha sheshibarta. Moshe takes the luchas and he breaks them. And Hashem says, thank you for breaking the tablets. Would you thank if your husband buys you a beautiful gift for the 25th anniversary, a tennis bracelet for $22,000, Mirza Hashem. And as a result of some anger or temper tantrum, whatever, we won't get into the therapy issues at the moment, he gets annoyed and he decides not to give it to you, and instead he breaks it, he destroys it. You'd say, Yasher koichecha. First of all, you don't want to give it. Give it back. Get back your money. Sell it on eBay. Hide it. You'll give it another day. Was brechst du? What are you breaking? What are you breaking the luchas for? Haluchas Maisa Lekim Ema. Hamichtav Lekim was a priceless gem. God crafted it with his own hands. Why are you breaking it? They don't deserve it. Keep it on the mountain. Put it in your tent. Hide it. Give it back to the Rebbe Shalom. Why break it? Good question, no? Shem says, I want to thank you for breaking the luchas. So a lot has been said about this. But I think there's one more point. Namely, the Jews created a golden calf, and they suddenly realized that they're broken people. They're broken people. They were broken. And God agreed. God said they're broken and they can't be fixed. You know, you take a beautiful glass bowl, and you break it. It's broken. You got to start over again. It's a hopeless bowl. Hashem told Moshe, there's nowhere to go. Let's just press, what do we do in the computer? Let's just press delete, and we'll open a new document. And you'll speak the new document. So what does Moshe do? Moshe takes the luchas and he shatters them into pieces. And suddenly, one Torah, one God, one truth is now shattered. into very many little pieces. And when the Jews look in the mirror and they see that they're broken, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, I want to tell you that God is there together with you in your broken places. And you could find God in your broken fragments. And Hashem looks at Moshe and he says, Yashikoichecha sheshibarta. That was a gift I couldn't do. I represent perfection. This is the gift that you could have done. As the Rebbe of the Jewish people, you could break the luchos and say, you know what, Hashem? We're not going to delete. We're going to do copy and paste. And yes, in the new paste is going to be a new format. It's not going to look like the old document. It's going to be a completely new format. But there's a relationship that is not about perfection and wholesomeness. It's a relationship where we acknowledge that we're broken. I think Hemingway said, life breaks all people, and some of us know how to live in broken places better than others. Somebody else once said, he said, when I was young, I used to cherish perfection. I wanted no holes. He says, today I cherish the cracks in my vessels because it's the cracks that allow the light to come in. It's the cracks, it's the broken fragments of the human soul in this world that somehow have a light all their own. And what Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Jewish people is he showed them that a relationship with Hashem sometimes comes in a very different way and in a very different fashion. Even in one's broken fragments, they can find the light of God. In their brokenness, they can find the broken luchos. And that's why the broken luchos were in Kodesh HaKadoshim. They were in the Holy of Holies. So when we look at ourselves, we look at other people. And they're so different. There's so much diversity. What the broken luchos teach us is, don't define truth in one perfect, wholesome model. Have the humility to be able to bend down and embrace every fragment, because every single one of those fragments is a piece of God's essence, is a piece of God's Torah, is a piece of God's luchos. And this is no simple task. This requires, I would say, a metamorphosis of consciousness. You know, we speak about the need to work on ourselves. We often at gatherings hear about the need to make achlotas, to make resolutions. It's very nice to make resolutions, but there's a problem. The problem is we understand resolutions as, I'm going to now start doing this and this. I'm going to start doing this and this, or not doing, refraining from this and this. But these are all dealing with external symptoms. It is often necessary to go and revisit the nets that we are using in life. Don't make resolutions. Challenge the consciousness from which you operate with in life. But for that, we often need guidance. We need mentorship. We need God's grace. The avodah that the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe demanded and demand is not only another resolution. It's an expansive consciousness of machzas half-shekel. It's the ability to be able to look at life from God's perspective. It's the ability to be able to look at myself and to look at you, to look at my challenges and to look at yours, to look at my shortcomings and to look at yours, to look at my blessings and to look at yours from the perspective of divinity, and not from the perspective of my net that is 8 inches and refuses to have any other measurement, and that's how I measure everybody and everything. And when you allow your net to be redefined, suddenly you see light where you never saw it before. And suddenly you see grace where you never saw it before. And suddenly you see love where you never saw it before. And suddenly you feel a lightness and a joy where you never felt it before. But that requires not a resolution. It requires the ability, the courage within me, within you, to be able to challenge my very consciousness, which therefore results in how I think, in how I speak, in how I do. And the primary focus is always on thoughts. Am I the master of my thoughts, or are the thoughts the master of me? Thoughts creep into our mind all day, judging people, all day. Baruch Hashem, we are an opinionated nation. And we have, before Google, we have a filing cabinet on everybody. And on their families, and their bubbas and zaydas, all the way, not only till the First World War, but all the way back to Chava eating from the tree of knowledge. And on every person there's another file, and some of us are cleverly masters of this art. And often we remain trapped in those paradigms for the remainder of our life, and almost all of our conversations follow an orbit. And we can't extricate ourselves ever from that orbit. We just go in circles again and again and again. Somebody once told me that they quit their subscription to a particular magazine. So I said, why? They said, because every week the magazine said exactly the same thing, just different letters, different words, just a different combination of letters and words. It's always the same thing. To live with Hashem means the ability to live with newness, the ability to look at life with novelty, to be able to be surprised by life, to be able to be shocked, to be able to be curious, like the quality of children and special children, an inquisitiveness, an innocence that doesn't come from naivete, it comes from sophistication. There is innocence that comes from naivete, and there's an innocence that comes from a certain sophistication, from a development in which you realize that humility is far more real than arrogance, that expansiveness is far more accurate than narrowness, that a lack of judgmentalism is far more insightful, far more penetrating, far more wise, far more acute than judgmentalism. To become a Sukkah of the Baal Shem Tov, to be able to walk around as the Baal Shem Tov Sukkah, an ambassador of love, of light, of hope, in the way that we communicate, in the way that we listen, in the way that we speak. I want to bless the entire Sharfstein family, Yartzeit of Zlata that we commemorate at this evening, with tremendous bracha v'hatzlacha, long life, happiness, health and prosperity, b'toiv hanire v'hanigla, in a very revealed and conspicuous way, la'arichas yomim v'shanim tovos, and to bless all of us, b'toich klal Yisroel, that we should be able to have the courage and the confidence to be able to look at each of our children, and at each child and at each person, and to be able to see them from the perspective of machshava hagduma da adam kadman. You like my bracha, Dr. Metzger? To be able to see a Jew from the perspective of machshava hagduma da adam kadman. And I don't mean it in a Kabbalistic sense, I mean it in a very practical sense. To be able to look at a person and before I open my mouth, say one thing. What did God think about this person when he created them? That's what I want to know. Then I'll open my mouth. But till I don't have that perspective, I don't open my mouth. I once said there was a couple that came to a Rav, 3 o'clock in the morning. He was learning. He looks at the couple. He says, why do you come now? So the wife says, we have a third world war erupting in the home. The rabbi says, what? She says, we're making a bris tomorrow. So he says, what's the war? We're fighting over the name. So the rabbi asks the woman, what's the question? What's the problem? So she says, I want my baby's name to be Moshe. So he turns to the husband and you. He says, I want my baby's name to be Moshe. So the rabbi says, wow, that's a classic Yiddish machlokas. You want Moshe, you want Moshe. So what's the problem? So she says, I want Moshe after my father. And he wants Moshe after his father. So the rabbi says, I have a brilliant idea. Why don't we give the name Moshe after both fathers? So she says, never. My father was a gentleman. He was a refined, intelligent, delightful, serene, selfless, kind, giving human being. My father-in-law was narcissistic. He was a gambler. He was a codependent. He was an alcoholic. He was despicable. He was self-centered. He was abusive. No way will I allow my son to be named after my father-in-law. Turns to her husband, what do you say? He says, listen, my father wasn't the greatest tzaddik in town, but he's still my father, and I want to give a name for him. The rabbi says, this is a good question, I have to think about it. Come back in 10 minutes. They come back in 10 minutes, and the rabbi says, the verdict is that the name of this baby shall be Moshe. Wow. Is that genius or what? No. They both scream out loud, after whom? She says, my father, his father. The rabbi says, now the name will be Moshe. After whom, we'll see when he grows up. As he grows up, we will examine his behavior and we will see. If he behaves one way, we will know he was named after your father. If he behaves another way, we will know that he is named after the other father. When I look at a child, I could see different things. I have to be able to have the ability to look at a child and see at every moment the infinite reflection of God in the heart and soul of this child, especially the special child. And in order to do that in the child, I have to be able to do that in myself. I have to be able to look at myself and see myself as the infinite reflection of God. If I reflect God, then I could see in you also the reflection of God, and the world can become one. Thank you very much.